If you cannot cope up with the daily news, you need to watch The Week That Was. Hello and welcome to The Week That Was, our weekly program where we review, we grapple and we analyze the news. My guest for today is Mr. Sujay Gupta, the group editor of the Herald Group of Publications. He has been a long-standing journalist and has taken up many issues with his large-hearted approach for the people and Goa itself. Mr. Sujay Gupta, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So let us dive into the news straight away. If you look at this Monday's newspaper, there is a news item which catches our eyes, which has to do with the Congress party. The Congress party, as you well know, has ruled Goa for a long time, but now is badly looking for an image makeover. So we have this news item on the Monday's newspaper which says, select your own candidate, and P.C. Chidambaram puts out these 5 criteria for selection of candidates, which says one criteria has to be loyalty, integrity, acceptance of workers, and winning capability of the MLAs, of their prospective MLAs. Now, how do you look at this? Because once elected, it's very difficult to tie down the MLA. So what is your view on this Congress strategy?
See, Dr. Fernandez, I think the strategy at this point of time is too little, too late, as I would say, because the Congress, if you recall, in 2017, when it failed to come to power for reasons that we all know, and there's no need to go into it at, in this particular show. But the point is that the Congress has not developed any of its constituencies for the last 5 years. They just left it blank. They lost about 10 to 12 MLAs. So there was absolutely zero preparation leading up to the elections. Yes. Now, they have now woken up knowing that there are about 3 to 4 months to go. Initially, it thought that they would have an absolutely open field and an open goalpost where they could score all the anti-incumbency goals. They didn't realize that the Trinamool Congress would come in with such force at this point of time. AAP has also kind of made its presence felt in certain pockets. So obviously they have realized that it is not as easy as it seems. Now, with regard to selecting your own candidates, that's the best way a democracy should function. But does democracy actually function this way? Because what the Congress is saying is nothing new. It's just lip service. Yeah. Primarily because if you see the Congress, always whenever you ask the Congress, they say the names of the candidates are going to come from the blocks. Then the districts will look into it, then it will come to the state election committee, and then it will finally go to the AICC. Now the AICC will finally decide and finally give the names. So what happens is the Congress has always been saying that they are promoting grassroots democracy and getting the choices made by people in the grassroots. But in reality, what happens is that the names are finalized behind closed doors and selected in the AICC itself. So what they do is it is just a farce. It's absolutely farcical that names are coming from the grassroots. Yeah. Because if names had to come from the grassroots, why does it have to come barely 1.5 to 2 months before polling? Yeah. The people, there should have been preparation and it should have come from before. So these are just pure election related noises and jargon, and there is not much seriousness to this at all.
Now, in your opinion, if you look at the Congress track record, you will find that it is very difficult to tie the MLAs. So can the Congress look for some legal device or some kind of a mechanism where post-poll they'll be able to tie down the MLAs to the party?
See, the only legal device has to be an absolute radical and game-changing reform in the electoral system. Okay, in the entire Act itself, the Representation of People's Act, which governs everything. The RPA has to be amended not just in Goa but nationally, where there should be an absolute firm amendment to state that anybody who defects from his party after getting elected gets disqualified immediately. The whole issue of changing parties should be brought to an end by very firm legislation like this. Otherwise, there is nothing that you can do. For instance, if you are a party of say 8 MLAs and you have about 4 to 5 of them who decide to move out, then they bypass the anti-defection system. That's exactly what happened to the Congress.
As it happens in Goa, where you have small legislatures.
Small legislatures, yes. The only way to do it is to have a national amendment where moving out of one party and going to another party is absolutely banned. The moment you do that, you get disqualified, and you are not disqualified for 6 years, and you won't be allowed to contest the by-elections that follow. That is the only way. There is no other way.
Now, are we leaving room for them to resign and recontest during that assembly term?
Yes, of course. My issue is that unless this kind of an amendment does not happen, there is always a possibility of they doing this. That people resign and recontest. I mean, you see a classic case within half an hour of Vishwajit Rane getting sworn in as the Congress MLA in 2017. He moves out of the assembly, goes to the toilet, has a wash, moves out, and it almost as if after that wash he becomes literally a BJP MLA. But he decides to quit. He resigns from the party immediately, contests the by-election, wins again with a thumping majority on a BJP ticket and wins. So we have seen this happen.
Basically, it's a mockery of the people's mind.
It's an absolute mockery, and it can only stop if there is a very firm legislation that the moment you resign as an MLA, or moment you resign from a particular party, not as an MLA, I'm sorry, moment you resign from a particular party, you get disqualified as an MLA for 6 years. That's the only way. There is no other, because you cannot bind them down with any other legalese, nor can you bind them and put them to any kind of moral standards, because that's absolutely absent.
Because the government basically works by convention. Parliamentary democracy works more by convention,
Yes.
which our MLAs and MPs, they break it like anybody's business. So moving on to the Tuesday's newspaper, there is a very important news item here which talks about state legislature scores very poorly, and that's by the ADR report, which is based on the Right to Information Act. Now in this report, very interestingly, they have seen that the average sittings of Goa Assembly has been just 16 days in a year. And at the highest, it has been 20 days, which happened in 2019. And overall, over the last 5 years, the Assembly shockingly has sat only for 80 days, which works out to about 1.4 days in a month. Now, nobody has this kind of a luxury at work. What is your first comments?
See, the first comment is that the legislative process has been completely sidelined. The real reason why you elect an MLA is to legislate. An MLA, these days what happens is the MLA functions as a councillor, he functions as a punch, he functions as a sarpanch, but he does not do his basic function to legislate.
And this is especially in Goa.
Especially in Goa. I'm talking of Goa. MLA, I mean the word itself, when you expand MLA, it says you are a member of the Legislative Assembly. What does the Legislative Assembly do? It legislates. Many of our very young viewers, students who are learning about how political and government processes work should know this, that at the end of the day, your primary responsibility is to see to it that you devise proper laws and proper policies for the benefit of the people. So when you sit only for about 80 days in 5 years, which works out to roughly about 1.5 days a month,
yeah.
1.5 days a month, what do you ultimately legislate? Then ultimately what happens is the assembly sittings become a mere formality, and if I would say so, it almost borders on farce, because what happens is then you do not get time to debate. How does legislations happen? Legislations happen when you have informed debate, when you have proper discussions, when you have informed arguments, when facts are placed on the table. Now, when these things don't happen, it obviously means that it's just tokenism. Now, you can't have 5 years of tokenism, and that is also happening primarily because there is no opposition, number one. Number two, you have leaders who do not understand, do not study, and they've been elected on due to reasons beyond their merit. So what happens is it's a vicious cycle. People who come in do not have the merit to actually be part of the legislative process in the manner that is effective. Number two, there is literally no opposition to speak of, so the ruling party does exactly what it wants. And three, very honestly, neither the ruling party nor the opposition are really interested in spending too much of time in the assembly. Which is why this happens.
So the COVID situation also was a good excuse, because the legal reason they put out was that we are in COVID times, but everything else was going on.
See, if we take COVID into account, let us as a thumb rule, multiply those 80 days into say three times. Okay, so you get 240 days. Now 240 days in 5 years is still not good enough.
Yeah.
I'm just saying you can totally obliterate the COVID system and multiply that by 3. Now, even if you do 240 days, 240 days in 5 years is about less than 50 days a year. In a sense. So my point is, less than 50 days a year is not just good enough, because you are literally doing if it is 50 days a year, then you're hardly meeting. I mean, 50 days across 12 months is absolutely nothing, which means about 4 days a month, which is just not good enough.
Yeah. And this has a very serious effect on the quality of legislation. For example, in 2021, shockingly, the Goa Assembly met just 3 days in July and 2 days in October.
Yes.
And that included passing of the budget.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, this is an example of how budgets are passed. You pass budgets in this kind of way. Look at the way the Bhumiputra bill was passed, for instance. On the last day of that particular session, the assembly stayed awake till supposedly worked till about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning. The entire the finance department and other department officials were called in the middle of the night to sign on files. The whole cabinet decision was taken through circulation. So it was, these kind of farcical exercises ultimately happened.
And the same day it was passed.
Same day it was passed with virtually no discussion. So this is the quality of our legislations.
Now, moving on to our next topic, which was taken up on Wednesday, there was a news item which said former and present Congress leaders, former Sarpanch, they raise allegations against Sports Minister Michael Lobo. And these allegations are quite serious, and calling him Pablo Escobar of Goa. They have said that the minister in the present BJP government is involved in the drug trade. Do you think that these are just election related allegations, or is this drug trade a serious issue in Goa?
Both of your questions are to be answered in the affirmative. Both are true. The fact that the political statements that are being bandied are absolutely election related, but the fact that the drug menace or trade or whatever you call it is completely entrenched and embedded, that is also true. If you look at that famous incident in 2013 when that Nigerian person Simeon was brutally butchered to death with his spinal cord cut in half and his arms severed, and then the Nigerians had a huge roadblock at the Crocero Circle. Now, incidentally, that was a gang war between the Nigerians and the local drug dealers. Now, there have been similar cases. If you look at 2018 to 2020, there has been a very steady increase in the number of seizures and number of seizures of everything from cocaine to marijuana to MSD, and then of course the smaller drugs like ganja and so on and so forth. So obviously these kind of seizures have happened. Another very interesting trend that has also happened is that ganja is actually grown in Goa now. There is cultivation of ganja happening in fields across Goa, and in addition to that these gangs have now started taking flats on rent only for this particular purpose. And one is saying this because arrests have been made to that effect. So we know it is on the record. It's not conjecture or hearsay. Also, at the same time, we know for a fact that there's a huge movement of hard drugs like cocaine and others from Colombia to Nigeria, and then Nigeria back into Goa. Goa has become a very strong hub for drugs to come in and move out. And there have been many, there have been drug dealers here. There have been drug dealers who've been caught. There are famous drug dealers who've been caught and arrested. Political links have also been spoken about. It's all there. In fact, I will just give you one very interesting example. There was a commando in the Turkish army who was caught with a huge cache of drugs, and he was operating in Goa for a very, very long time. He was actually a commando in the Turkish army. He just retired. Whether he was wearing the uniform or not, we don't know. But what I'm essentially saying is that these incidents point to a very, very clear, transparent and obvious presence of the drug trade at various levels and by various actors and obviously there is political patronage and police patronage. That's very clear about it.
Yeah, the big question comes that there is no crackdown on it, even if the political class knows or the ruling government knows about it and the police. Yes. And incidentally, the DGP's final message was there should be a crackdown on drugs in Goa.
Well, DGP's come and go, and DGPs along the last 10 years have all said the same thing. Now in 2021, if you are saying that there should be a crackdown when there has been no crackdown for the last 7 to 8 years, these seem like just very hackneyed and statements that you have to make. But there's no serious intent. So far, there is no serious intent. There needs to be very serious political intent, and only then will there be administrative intent.
Another news item that we had seen during the week was this implosion in the BJP. You have fighting in Bardez between the MAPSA MLA Joshua D'Souza, and directly he's calling on the party leadership to take action against Michael Lobo, who is the ports minister and whom he accuses of interfering in his constituency. And even though he's a minister in the BJP government, is openly supporting the Congress candidate.
Look, I'm not surprised at all. The fact that the BJP is imploding from within, other parties do. Because what happens is that the core of the BJP was earlier based on cadre, and a disciplined cadre was behind every political movement. Yeah. And the BJP, of course, the old BJP sprung from a strong organization political movement. That core of the BJP is completely gone. Okay, BJP is like just another party. Okay,
just like more or
from
less
a party with a difference, it is a party which is no different. That is exactly what the BJP is now. Now the point here is that if you see in BJP there are individual candidates. Out of the, how many MLAs does BJP have now? 24 or 25, right? I mean, give or take here and there. My point is, how many of them are actual BJP? Apart from, say, the Chief Minister himself,
who can come up from the cadres,
who can be considered as a cadre man, and Milind Nayak, who has been with the BJP for a very long time, so you can still count him as one of the. Apart from these two, can you recall anybody who's part of the original BJP? I won't know. Maybe Nilesh Cabral and Glenn Ticklow, yes, to a certain extent, because they've been around for a long time.
And essentially, their background is congressmen. Actually, they were
ultimately
the Congress
both. That's what I'm saying. So if you really dig deep, you will find this one or two MLAs who can claim that they are originally from the BJP. So obviously that has changed. Number two, one must understand that a lot of these MLAs, for them it is very important to do two things. One is beat anti-incumbency and get elected again, because for them being in power or being in a party which is ruling is very critical, because especially if there are ministers, do realize that in their ministries and departments they have a lot of unfinished work. And what does unfinished work mean? Unfinished work means promises that they've made to different kinds of people for considerations that we all know. Okay, now to keep that whole chain going, they need to be back in par with the authority that they have at this point of time. So these elections is very, very critical for all of them, and their primary focus is to come back to power. It has got nothing to do with BJP ideology, and which is why these kind of things happen. And how do you come to power? You can only come to power if you not only win your seat, but you have the capacity to be in charge of or get other people elected from other seats, so that even within the whole ecosystem, you have more MLAs on your side. And when you have whole MLAs on your side, either in the same party or from a different party, you do not stand a chance to becoming a chief minister or a minister for that matter. And that's exactly what is happening. Michael Lobo and the Joshua fight is not so much about he being against Joshua, but he wanting to have his own person there so that he can control 2 or 3 seats, and that's exactly where the battle.
So by that logic, even the battle that's going on in Mormungaon Taluka between the Vasco MLA Carlos Almeida and Milind Naik, who is a minister, is the same. So one would say that Carlos is really not in love with heritage or renovation of things of heritage.
Well, he may be. I mean, we don't know. He may well be in love with heritage, but that's a different point. But the point is, he is raising this issue now to ensure that he makes a political noise and takes a pot shot at him. I'm not very sure as to why he would attack Milind, because Milind is not in his constituency at this point of time. But maybe there's a larger battle there. The other issue is that he also wants to make some strong remarks, because he wants to prevent Daji Salkar from joining the BJP. Because if Daji Salkar joins the BJP, Daji gets the ticket in Vasco, and he doesn't. So obviously there's a bit of power play happening here, trying to gain ground, take pot shots, and come across as a strong MLA. I think that's all there is to it.
Okay, moving on to our Thursday topic in the newspaper, in the Herald, which is the Voice of Goa. We come across this new entrance TMC in Goa, and they have taken on the nexus which has always existed between the politicians and the mining lobby in Goa. What in your estimation, you have studied Goa very closely, what is in your estimation this nexus and how has it affected Goan politics?
Look, the thing is, after the Supreme Court gave that historic judgment, and the ground has actually slipped from big mining to a large extent. Right now, there are no mining leases in operation. But at the same time, the big mining companies have always been players in politics, and they've always enjoyed a very cozy relationship with the government in power, whether it's Congress or whether it's the BJP, and that relationship is very enduring and it goes on. We all know to what extent the government went to ensure that mining leases were renewed. Yes. Then even when the court struck it down, the efforts made by the government to file a review petition to get those leases back in operation. So that relationship is there. What has now happened is that the Goa Foundation's Goenchi Mati movement is something that one should look at very, very seriously, because it is in sync with what should definitely be done to ensure that the mineral resources are in the hands of the people. The state becomes a custodian of those resources as a custodian, so that those resources are protected and passed on to the next generation. Number two, as part of this whole philosophy, the mining wealth and the proceeds out of mining wealth should ultimately come back to the people, and the export and the money earned through export of mining should also come back, and mining operations should happen through this process, and the wealth or the earnings from mining should be given back to the people as a dividend. This is how. Now one can turn around and say this is too socialistic, this is not practical. No, but instead of getting into these knee-jerk reactions and saying that these will not happen, the idea is to embrace the philosophy and work out ways and means on how it can happen. There needs to be a will, and there will be a way. But right now I feel that there is no will. The government is talking of the Mineral Development Corporation and so on and so forth. The idea is very good, but if they put the same people who are responsible for illegal mining back into the corporation and do the same thing in a different avatar, then it's not going to work. So but it is important that the TMC has supported this. It is important that TMC is the only party that has decided to endorse the Goenchi Mati movement and what Goa Foundation does. So I think it augurs well if political parties take this issue up responsibly for the people.
Now, also another question on the TMC is, with the big joining of the former Chief Minister, two-time Chief Minister Luizen Falero, TMC got a big boost in Goa. Also, today's news about Kiran Kandolkar joining the TMC would also be a big booster for the TMC.
Yes, I'll tell you why Kiran's joining is important. It basically gives a boost to a different kind of a narrative, which will help TMC. You see, what happens is when TMC came in, opposite parties, others, sections of the media that got more rattled with the TMC's entry than opposition parties itself, all of them, there were two refrains. One is that it is a party which divides, number one. Secondly, it is a party which is anti-Hindu. I mean, I'm aware that there's hardly any basis to these kind of arguments, but social media, but these kind of arguments really took shape. Number one, what happens is it tells the people, and the reality is that a large number of people from all communities across all constituencies have joined the TMC. There's no doubt about it. So the point is, this will also say that number one, you have people from all sections coming in. It gives that kind of a boost. It also means that there are, for instance, he's a very tall Bhandari leader. Kiran Khandolkar undoubtedly is a Bhandari leader. And in the sense, he carries the weight of aspirations of a large number of Bhandaris, all of them who are looking for greater representation, who are looking for a greater presence in the political and the socio-economic and administrative ecosystem. So I think it works. That narrative gets much stronger. So I think Kiran's joining is not about 1 or 2 seats. It is about a greater perception about the TMC being a more inclusive and a holistic party spreading to all parts of Goa. I think that is a bigger gain than just 1 or 2 constituencies.
So we have had a fascinating discussion, and we appreciate the insights that you have put forth before our audience, and we hope that a lot of people are able to catch up with the news, including the analysis and insights on this program the week that was. I am afraid that we have run out of time and we have to conclude it here. We thank our guest Mr. Sujay Gupta for his presence and for his insights, and we hope that he continues his battle for Goa in the years to come.
We all will. As journalists, that's all we can do, and we surely will. And Herald, of course, will be in the forefront of this.
Thank you.